Okay, good evening, everybody. My name's Helen Parr, and I work for Devon Wildlife Trust on the Green Minds project in Plymouth. Devon Wildlife Trust are a partner on this exciting Plymouth City Council-led project, which is funded by European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions. And within the Green Minds project, we're encouraging people to develop a green mindset, putting nature and wildlife at the heart of decisions made around Plymouth's green spaces. It's all about trying to make space for nature and also helping local people connect with the natural world and getting all the physical and mental health benefits that we know this can bring. So it's a win-win project, really. And for the Wildlife Trust, it's a unique opportunity to bring our experience and enthusiasm for wildlife and nature to a large city like Plymouth. As there's so many green spaces around the city, and not forgetting the blue spaces as well, as Plymouth is surrounded by ocean and estuaries. And part of that work is to offer events like this, also training opportunities. So if you live in Plymouth, look out for future events on the greenmindsplymouth.com website. You can also find out lots more about the activities of the Green Minds project. So now on to tonight's main event, our talk. We're going to learn the basics of identifying wildlife using the tracks and signs they leave behind. And I'll let our speaker introduce herself. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Helen. I'm just going to share my screen here. There we go. Okay, so thank you all for coming this evening. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tracks and signs and things that you might find as you're out and about on your walks. I think Helen's already gone through Green Minds. But it is something that we are really excited to be part of, and do check out other talks that we might have coming up. So signs can be such a variety of different signs. There's footprints, paths, feeding signs, and that can be anything from the way that something nibbles grass to whether it's a fox or a sparrowhawk that's killed a pigeon. Fur, nests and burrows, droppings, bones or skin, eggs. I'm not going to delve into birds' eggs and things very much because I think we'd be here for a week if I did that. Sightings, so things that you know that's why we're looking at signs of things that are too elusive, and of course pellets. So this evening, I'm going to focus mostly on footpaths, feeding signs, and a few bits and pieces of the others, and again, mostly mammals. There is so much that we could talk about this evening. Tracks and signs are so fascinating and great fun to get involved in and try and read. So part one, footprints and tracks. So things to look for here is to look at the shape, to look at the size, count the toes. So you see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 toes. Are they on soft or hard ground? Because that can make a difference to the shape of the print, and also how, you know, if you're comparing it to a print in a book, how soft the ground is might make a difference of what it looks like compared to the sort of official version in a book. Have they been left on a slope? So that can really make a difference because it will change the weight of how the animal's walking. Could the animal maybe have slipped down the slope? So you've got a sort of elongated print. And then also taking everything into context. So where are you? Are you in the middle of a really urban area? Are you right in the centre of Plymouth? Are you on the outskirts? Or are you way out in the countryside somewhere? Because that might also be a piece of the puzzle. So that's something that we need to know with signs, is that sometimes just one is not enough to be really conclusive, because you can get signs that are really similar. Sometimes you need to really piece things together to work out what animal has been passed through there and left these signs. So here's a tip. If you're going to take a photo for your reference, or you want to send it to us, which we'd love to see, put something in the picture for scale. So I would say, you know, there was a time when everyone kept coins in their pockets. I'm not sure with lockdown that's happened so much now, but a coin or a pen, you know, if you just got a biro or something that gives an idea of scale. So we're going to go through the most common footprints first, and this is the one that you are going to find almost everywhere you go, and it's of course a dog. Really wide range of sizes. If you imagine just how, you know, the variety of sizes dogs can be, but the sort of basics of their footprint are all the same. So you've got these 4 toes and this sort of slightly triangular loby pad behind, and then you can see the claws quite clearly as well. So that is one you will find absolutely everywhere. One that may be another really common animal, but one that you see not as much, are cats. And that's probably because cats have got a bit more sense than to start wading through lots of mud. But again, you've got the four toes and a much sort of larger pad compared to the toes, and no claw marks here, because obviously cats will keep those retracted. Another animal that we find lots of around urban areas are squirrels. So red and grey both have very similar footprints, but I think around Plymouth you'd be quite unlikely to find a red squirrel. That would be rather exciting. They've got 4 toes on their forefoot, or at least that's what shows up in the print, and 5 toes on the hind foot. So with lots of animals you do get slightly different prints fore and back. So you can see here I've put down a pound coin next to this rear foot from the squirrel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see the claws, and I always think that they look a little bit like a handprint with extra claws for a squirrel. And this was in some soft mud next to a stream, so you've got a really nice outline of a print. You can really clearly see the claws and the pads, but they're quite small, so that's the size of a pound coin. Moving on to something a little bit larger, we've got a badger. So badgers are part of the mustelid family, and they all have 5 toes. And you can see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these really long claws. I mean, you can see how far away the edge of those claws are from the toe. They really are very powerful diggers, and so they have those long claws to help them dig out their tunnels and their sets, and to forage with as well. And this really kidney-shaped pad here. Now there is another pad that occasionally you see called proximal pad, which is effectively the heel. So what we're seeing there is the ends of the toes, and then sort of this bit of our hand. I hope you can see me there. And occasionally you get the heel, which would be here on our hand, but they tend to only put that bit down. And that's the same for a lot of mammals. And these are about 6 centimetres. Again, some nice soft mud, great for a print. You might find badger prints near badger tracks. So badgers travel along the same path really regularly, particularly if it's something that's near their set. You know, they might go along there every night. They don't have great eyesight, so they'll just sort of trundle along using their really good sense of smell, sticking along the same path, and eventually they just wear it down to earth. I was once doing a bat survey on a badger track, and I heard a little snuffling. This badger was happily plodding towards me, and it got within a couple of feet before it realised I was there, or I think I moved so it didn't actually walk into my foot. But their eyesight's really not great. They just really stick to their path and just keep going back and forth each night. They do the same over our hedge banks. So Devon has, these wonderful hedge banks that are large, and obviously animals need to get from one side to another, and badgers really do wear lovely paths over these. They will be used by deer as well, because it's an easy and accessible pathway, but it's likely that it's actually the badger that initially created that. And here's a scrape. So you'll get these whether the badger's going we'll make these for a variety of reasons. But you can see the claw marks in here, those really long claws that we saw on that print photo. So you might just see the claw marks sometimes, particularly on hedge banks. So sticking with the mustelids, this is an otter. So 5 toes, if we count them again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this isn't a strange otter. It's actually because when they're walking, and this happens with a few species, they'll put down their front foot, and then as they walk, their hind foot will go in exactly the same spot and overlay it. And with otters, their hind feet is slightly larger than the forefeet, so it kind of just overwrites that first print. But it has left a little bit of the other print here, which means it looks like it has 6 toes. But don't be concerned about your otters if you see this. It's just because there's actually 2 footprints in one. So you can just about here see, might take a little bit of imagination, but there's been a little bit of webbing here. So this is obviously really lovely, fine, silty mud that this otter's walked through. And so you've got the nice pad there and the webbing. You don't often get webbing showing up unless it is on this sort of substrate, this really nice, fine silty mud, because there's just too delicate otherwise. But obviously otters will have webbing between their toes. They're great swimmers. So that's something that if you do see, we'll give it away as an otter. There isn't anything else we're going to get that's that big, that's got webbed toes. Otters, like badgers, will leave tracks. Sometimes not quite as, they don't have quite the same routine as badgers. They will use tracks, particularly to go to like shortcuts to their favourite fishing areas, or to cut off a loop in the river. They'll take a shortcut and hop across ground. There'll also be areas where they use as slides to get into the river, and favourite places where they might lie up. So rather than being a halt, they'll just lie up above ground as well. And those, if they're favourites, they might have a little track around them. And obviously if they're cutting through the snow here, which is pretty obvious, that looks like it's either gone there and back, or it's been a couple of otters on that one. So I'm sticking here again with the water related mammals. This one's a mink. So it's an American mink. They're an invasive species. They sort of entered our ecosystem in the 70s, and these have become really quite widespread throughout our waterways. So this is a snippet from a really good book, Tracks, Trails and Signs, which I'll reference later on. That's got some fantastic images in it if you want to get into looking at tracks and signs. So with a lot of the smaller mammals, you'll find they've got 5 toes. So mink is a bit of a classic one, long claws and quite splayed as well. This is sort of 3 by 4 centimetres, so it's larger than, considerably larger than any of our small mammals. But very smelly droppings. I might talk about that a bit later. Thankfully we're on Zoom, so I don't have to submit you to the sample that I've got from mink droppings. I said mink. Now where you get mink, you don't really get waterfalls. And actually you don't get waterfalls in very many places at all in Devon anymore. They were once really widespread, but now they're only found in certain areas where there's been reintroductions. As far as I know, there aren't any in Plymouth, but I put this in because they are animals that are cropping up more and more as they kind of spread away from the original introduction site. And it's something, particularly for people who are living outside of Plymouth, it's a really nice one to look for in the summer, alongside ditches and streams. So you can see again, it's got quite a similar shape, these really splayed 5 toes, and you've got the kind of 3 pointing up and 2 pointing out to the sides, which is unfortunately very similar to rat prints. And they differ slightly in size, but we're talking a couple of millimeters, which this is a fantastically clear print. Most of the prints you get do not look as nice as this. And also they differ slightly with some of the more detailed pad marks here, again, which rarely come up in the real world. But I thought I'd put them in here because, as I said in the beginning, sometimes if you're trying to work out what animals have been around, you need to really piece together clues. So between all the signs, so the tracks, feeding signs, droppings, things like that will all sometimes combine to tell you exactly what's been there. So we're going larger again, to a fox, back to 4 toes. So usually about 5 centimetres long ways and 4.5 wide, approximately. And you often find fox tracks in a nice straight line. So they like to follow the same path and use quite regular trails. They've got a scent gland on their feet, which allows them to really easily follow where they've been before and just keep going along in the dark. The straight line also is a really good way of telling them apart from a dog. So anyone who's walked a dog knows that they'll go in 50 directions every minute, but a fox will be a lot more economical with going from A to B without too much swerving around. Another good way of telling fox and dog prints apart, here's my 2 sort of sketches. Apologies for the drawings. You can see that there is some initial differences with how these toes are sort of laid out. They're much sort of wider spread with the dog. But here's the key is, can you draw a cross through it? So if you draw a cross between the first and second, and the third and fourth toes going across, if they meet on the pad, then it's probably going to be a dog. And if they meet in sort of space in the middle, it's more likely to be a fox. So here's that initial dog print that I had at the beginning. So that's one hopefully quite easy way of telling these 2 apart. So I hope I'm not going too fast. There are so many things I wanted to tell you that I've put quite a lot into this talk. So if you have any questions as we're going along, please do pop them in the chat, and me and Helen will go through them at the end. Moving on to deer. Red deer have sort of reasonably big prints. I don't think there are any red deer around Plymouth, but if you go up onto Dartmoor, particularly if you go to North Devon, you do get them. And I've put them in here just for a bit of a comparison of scale. So dew claws, people who have dogs and cats might be familiar with that term. They are sort of sections that happen sort of further up sort of almost on the ankle. And deer have them as well. So they have the 2 cleaves that you see the print of, and they also have a couple of little bits that are sort of further up, that when it's really soft and they're really sinking into the ground, then occasionally you can see these extra little marks, which I've got a photo of in a moment. This is a fallow deer. There's a good population of fallow deer in Plymouth. They seem to be quite happy there. I've seen them meandering through industrial estates in Plymouth. So they are a bit smaller, and they've got a sort of quite a wavy outline to each of these sides, compared to here we've got the roe, which is quite common across most of Devon, which is quite a lot smaller, and it's much more sort of simple shape with none of the sort of waviness that you get on a fallow print. I made a little note because I had a look at what was found around Plymouth, and there have been a couple of muntjac sightings. Only a couple, so I think they're probably quite rare, and who knows if they're still around, but they're similar to roe. But one of these cleaves is absolutely always smaller than the other one. whereas they're usually pretty even in a roe deer. So here's a roe deer print, and in really soft ground and on a little bit of a slope. So I always carry a ruler around with me. So here's my for scale ruler, and you can see that it probably is about 4.5–5 centimeters. And then these are the dew claw bits here. So these are the extra bits that, because it's so soft, that foot's really gone into the mud and left a couple of extra prints at the back. Oops. Okay, on to the fun bit, droppings. This picture here is of deer droppings, and I think they are fallow deer. Roe and fallow deer will have quite similar droppings. The fallow deer, I think, is ever so slightly larger. It's got a very definite point at one end. You can see on that one there. And the interesting thing with fallow deer is that male and female deer will have slightly different droppings. So the female deer, trying to remember which way around it is, will have a really sort of rounded, so they've got pointy at one end and really rounded at the other end, whereas the male deer will have pointed at one end and it will have a little indent on the other end. So you can even tell what sex of deer has been through by looking at the droppings. With deer, as well as pretty much everything, droppings will change slightly throughout the year depending on what they're eating. So in spring with deer, they're eating that really lovely, rich, lush grass. And so they have quite dark, sometimes slightly sort of wetter consistency droppings. Roe deer might have droppings in a lump. Whereas if you're going through to winter and they're eating much sort of coarser, older vegetation, their droppings will be slightly different. Obviously, the most common dropping that you'll find, I don't have a photo of it, and that is again dog, but I'm sure we will all recognise that one. So otter spraint is a great sign. These you find obviously along rivers. They have, like you can see here, little bits of fish bone in them. You can get, they'll sometimes take small amphibians as well. So you might find all sorts of bones and fish scales in the droppings. When they're first laid, they're really quite black, and they have a sort of slightly gelatinous outside to them, which over time they dry out a bit, they become a bit paler, and you can really start to see the scales and the little bones inside them much more easily. Otters also tend to use their spraint to mark their territory a bit, or to communicate with other otters. So they'll lay it somewhere that's really prominent position, something that if another otter came along, they couldn't help but notice it. So this one you can see is on the edge of a rock. They'll lay them, they'll leave spraint underneath bridges, on big sort of prominent rocks, on trees or roots of trees right next to the river, on where you get little sort of shingle bars on a bend of a river. And where they don't have somewhere really good to leave a spraint, sometimes they will make a little sandcastle next to a stream and lay a spraint on top of that, because they will make it as prominent as they can. So in so across Devon, we've got otters, I think, on pretty much every watercourse in Devon. There's usually plenty of nice big rocks and trees about for them to leave spraint on, but they do sometimes sandcastle as well. So I mentioned before that mink droppings are really quite unpleasant. You might find those as well next to watercourses. They are typical mustelid ones. So they're really twisty, and a mink will eat pretty much whatever it can find. So it'll often be bits of hair in there as well, and they really do stink. They're quite unpleasant. So these are waterfalls, again by the riverbank, and really classic shape droppings here, little tic-tac shapes, and they lay latrines. So they go back to the same place and lay their droppings again and again in the same place. So you can see these ones are probably the freshest ones, really green colour, because that's what they've been eating, is lots of green vegetation. And some of the older ones here, that they will over time sort of trample down and they'll disintegrate into this mud. So when I said about having to piece bits of information together, this is fantastic. In this picture, there are 3 indications of waterfalls. We've got the droppings. We've got this little footpath here that runs along next to the water's edge. And we've got some feeding signs as well, which I'll talk about other species feeding signs in a bit later on. But here's a lovely bit of grass, and it's cut this really distinctive 45-degree angle, which is how you can really tell that it's been done by a waterfall. So on to badgers. Sorry, I'm hopping between species a bit, so I hope that that's all right. Badger, again, will use latrines, just as a waterfall will, but in a slightly different way. They will generally put a latrine towards the edge of their territory, and the whole family will sort of use that, and they might have a few to mark out where the edges of their territory are. And they'll dig a little hole and they'll leave their droppings in there. And badgers, when you find a badger latrine, there's often sort of numerous little holes, and the droppings in there really do change with the season. Over winter, badgers eat a lot of earthworms, so their droppings are very sort of just muddy, really. And in autumn they can eat a lot of berries, and they can be bright purple. So over the seasons they really do change. You can see exactly what they've been eating. So here we've got a foxscat. This one is quite typical. I mean, it's quite small, but it's typical in that it's a little bit twisty at one end, and it contains hair and bones. You can't see that very well at this stage. Often when they get a little bit drier, that becomes much more evident. You can see at this twisty end, that's actually probably a bit of hair that's poking out. And as they dry, they do become even grayer. So they can be a variety of colours, as discussed. But they do tend to become quite grey as they get older, and they're really full of hair. And as they get drier, you can see the twist as well. Grey is a typical colour. They're also quite strongly scented. So the previous slide with the badger droppings, they don't actually smell too bad at all, badger droppings. But foxes, that you definitely know that's a fox if you give it a sniff, which is obviously an identification method that we can't unfortunately do over Zoom. I'm sure that everybody knows what rabbit droppings look like, and frequently I think it's probably the rabbit fur that you'd find in a foxscat. So rabbit droppings, they're small, they're round, they're quite dark. The only thing, well, sometimes you might get them confused with deer droppings, but remember fallow deer have got that little point on, and roe as well to a certain extent, although they're a little bit more rounded, but they're more oval shape than rabbit droppings, which are usually pretty round. We do get brown hares in Devon, and we always love to hear about sightings of those because they're quite rare. Probably not likely to have them around Plymouth, but if you're out and about in the countryside elsewhere, brown hare droppings are sort of twice as large, really. They're a couple of centimetres across, and they tend to be slightly coarser, the vegetation, so you can really see the vegetation in the droppings. Okay, I've got a few pictures here with some bat droppings and feeding remains. because I love bats and I think they're really interesting. Something I want to say beforehand though is that bats and their roosts are protected under law, so you're not allowed to disturb them. However, sometimes they'll perch or just use a night roost, it's called, where they might sit while they eat their food, sometimes in porches of buildings. So maybe right on your front doorstep you might find some droppings without disturbing any bats. So these are common pipistrelle droppings. And this is I think this is a 5p piece, so you can see how small they are. They look a little bit like other small mammal droppings, like you might get a mouse or something. There's a really good way of telling one apart from the other, and that is if it's a mouse dropping, if you crumbled it between your fingers or you rubbed it between your fingers like this, it would just roll round and round, and then you'd feel a bit disgusting, because mice eat everything. Whereas if you did that with a bat dropping and you rubbed it between your fingers, it would just crumble into dust. And that's because bats, all our bats are insect eaters. So they've got all that chitinous exoskeleton that they digest. They digest it very quickly, actually. And that's what comes out in their droppings. So they really do crumble into dust. These are some more feeding signs. So these are greater horseshoe bat droppings, so quite a lot bigger. And you can see that they've also been eating beetles, and there's no point in eating those wing cases. You know, they're not going to give them any nutrition, so they've just bitten them off and dropped them below where they are. So whereas smaller bats like pipistrelles will eat on the wing, if you're a greater horseshoe and you've caught a huge beetle, they'll even, you know, they'll go for cockchafers as well, so they'll really go for quite big prey. You're not going to want to have a go at eating that while you're flying around. So that's when they come into a roost and they'll sit there and they'll eat, and they'll leave the remains of the beetles on the ground. So those you might find often intermingled with some droppings. And the final one that is generally typical of bats, long-eareds and greater horseshoes, quite typical, but also I've seen serotine leave these as well. These are yellow underwing moths, and they are a favourite meal of a number of our bat species. So sometimes finding a pile of these somewhere quite consistently shows that you might have bats there too. But yes, please remember what I said about not disturbing bats. Okay, part 3. So feeding signs, nests, hair, tunnels is basically where I put everything else that wasn't footprints or droppings. So as I said, any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll go through them later. So here we go. Here's the first little someone's home, badger set. It's in use. You can sometimes tell if a badger set is in use because you can actually find just the guard hairs, which are the really coarse hairs off a badger, generally along its back and sides, around a set entrance. And it'll be usually when they're in use, it's quite evident. So if you do find a badger set in use, then you know, leave it be. You can also tell the difference between a badger set and a rabbit burrow from the width. Now, not necessarily the width right at the entrance. And this is if it's just a single set. Obviously, if it's a main set and there's huge spoils of earth from where they've been digging out, then I think you know it's not a rabbit. But also badgers sometimes, aside from the main sets, they just have single hole sets where there'll be just one tunnel into a chamber, and that might have been there for a while, so there's no evident obvious spoil heap. Now a badger set, once you kind of get to the bit of the tunnel, now I was told that if you put your hand in, I hope you can see me doing this, between your thumb and your little finger like that. You couldn't touch the sides if it's a badger set, whereas you could if it's a rabbit. Now, having said that's the way to check, I am not advising people to go and stick their arms down holes that they find out and about. So maybe just sort of mentally measure it like that and look. Okay, so we've talked about badger sets. Here's another burrow, much smaller, and this one's a waterfall. They like to be on grassy banks, but you will find rat burrows as well along waterways and various places. Rats will make burrows, and but they're not so picky about it being having a lovely lawn around the outside. They'll do it in sort of much more earthy banks as well, but similar size. So again, you know, just finding one burrow might be a piece of the puzzle to see what's there. So with our small mammals, and by small mammals I'm talking about mice and voles, shrews, you rarely get tracks outside. You know, they're so small and so light that they're very unlikely to leave prints. So generally we rely on feeding signs or even their nests, unless you're part of a study, and I know there's some really good studies going on around Devon using footprint tunnels, which is something you can do with a piece of tube, so maybe a bit of sort of square drain pipe type thing, and you can put in a strip of paper with some it's usually a kind of charcoal based ink, so it's not going to cause any harm, and then the small mammals walk across the ink and they walk across the paper, and then you get a million small dots that you need to interpret, but at least you can get some footprints. And if you have the time and the experience, you can tell what has been over that bit of paper. You can also do that for hedgehogs using slightly larger tunnels and a bit of paper and the charcoal ink, which is quite nice, and they obviously leave bigger prints. I did realise actually as I'm talking that I haven't put any hedgehog droppings in here, but I believe there is a hedgehog talk coming up in not too long, and I'm sure that there'll be examples in there. So, as I said, we tend to rely on feeding signs. Now, this is a hazelnut. Hazelnuts are an amazing source of energy for small mammals in the autumn going into winter. This one's been eaten by a squirrel. Squirrels are quite big. They can probably chomp and shear off that outer bit of nut to get to the nice hazelnut inside. This one is a wood mouse, and hopefully you can see here the little chisels from the teeth marks going all the way around the edge of this hole, and a few little tooth marks around on the outside as well. So that's how you tell that one's a wood mouse, as opposed to this one, which is a dormouse. So this is a way that you can survey for dormice without a license, because dormice and their nests are also both protected, and you need to have a special license to survey them. But you can go on nut hunts without a license, and that's quite a nice way of looking for dormice, but really smooth. So the dormouse eats these hazelnuts when they're still quite green. They don't stash them ever. They don't need to because they're asleep over winter, whereas wood mice and squirrels will do. And so they can eat the really soft outer nut, and they kind of chew round it, scraping away, creating this lovely smooth braided edge is what it's generally referred as. So here's some more. The other thing I always notice about dormouse chewed nuts is they do leave a lovely, really spherical circular hole in the nut, and squirrels they leave really messy ones. So that is what you will find in the majority wherever you go. So have a look this autumn, see what you can spot. I put a little summary together here. So we've got the braided edge or the chiseled edge. So these are the typical species that you'll find. Bank vole, wood mouse, dormouse, and of course squirrel, who just go in there and break them open as quickly as they can in whatever means possible. So remember, if you find a stash of those, it's definitely not dormouse. You also get birds who eat hazelnuts. So nuthatches will wedge them in holes or bits of bark in a tree. And great tits as well will punch little holes into a nut to try and get some of the goodness inside. So small mammals as well, where they live. So here we've got a harvest mouse nest. And here's another one. So woven out of the grass, little harvest mouse climbs up into a clump of grass, and it starts weaving together all the threads in the summer. So when it's originally built, this would be green, but we generally don't look for harvest mouse nests in the summer because they might have babies in them and we don't want to disturb them. So in winter, when the grass starts to die back, it's quite a good time to actually look for harvest mouse nests. And they're really woven into the grass. So if you wanted to pick one up, if you knew it didn't have any young in it in winter, it would be actually attached to the clump of grass. You'd have to rip up some grass probably to get it. Whereas a vole nest would be little short lengths of grass that if you picked it up, it would just disintegrate. And I thought I'd put this in because I love this picture. These are a couple of dormice in spring who only had the energy to make a quick blanket rather than a nest. But it's got the key element of dormouse nests, which is this green leafy outer. So they pick off the green leaves from the tree while they're still supple, and they mold them around the outside of the nest. So if you do find one of those, you might find them in a hedgerow, or they do crop up in strange places. Just leave it alone, because as I said, dormouse nests are legally protected. You can obviously still find fur on barbed wire. A lot of it will be dog hair, but you can sometimes find some thick badger hairs, particularly the guard hairs that I mentioned before. They're oval in shape, so they don't roll between your fingers. They kind of go clunk, clunk, clunk. Here on a gate. This actually, my mum sent me these photos a couple of weeks ago, and it's of more badger hair than you'd expect to find in one go. So I hope this badger's all right. But you can see these really, really coarse guard hairs that they have along their backs. And it's these that really do get caught up in almost everything as they're snuffling around under and over gates. So again, if we were all here, I have a large stash of badger hair now. We've only got a few more slides. So I know we're going through a lot this evening. So I hope that you're taking it in, and please do ask me questions if you have any at the end. So here we've got mole hills. Now mole tunnels, they could be tunnels underneath and you wouldn't know about them unless they needed work and the spoil needs to be removed, creating these mole hills. So we're going to start seeing more of them as they really do work on their tunnels and they look for mates in the spring. A mole can dig about 1 metre of tunnel in 4 hours, which I think for little animals pretty good. You'll also get more mole hills cropping up in the autumn as the young sort of disperse and find their own place to dig tunnels. They will just move into empty tunnels that if the previous mole has died. So there could be tunnels underneath your lawn that you just don't know about, but there are moles under there. Interestingly, mole tunnels will have chambers where they have their young. They'll also have chambers where they keep their food. And these are live worms that they've incapacitated, and they keep them in a nice little chamber for when they're hungry for later, which is a slightly gruesome image, really. I apologise for that. So a few non-mammal things we're going to quickly go through. So here, reptiles. Reptiles will shed their skin each year. They will do that somewhere where they feel quite safe. So if you've got something in your garden that warms up, that a reptile could get underneath, they might do it there where they feel quite safe, but it's quite warm. Grass snakes lay eggs. They love laying them in compost heaps. So that's how you can tell if there's been a grass snake around, because they can be quite elusive otherwise. But the best thing to do is actually see if you can find some from spring to autumn underneath any bit of tin or plastic that might warm up nicely, that they can use to heat themselves up in the morning. Now's a really good time to find frog spawn and toad spawn. I think some at Pool Farm has hatched a couple of weeks ago, so they're well on their way. Frogs lay their spawn in a big sort of jelly clump, and toads lay them in strings, so that's the difference. The tadpoles look very similar when they're small, but toad tadpoles tend to stay black, and frog tadpoles will go a sort of mottledy greenish colour. So if you can get a close-up look at a tadpole, you might be able to tell which it is, frog or toad. And then a little bit about birds. These are some owl pellets. You can see the little small mammal bones in here. You do get different, I think these are tawny owl ones, but you do get different sizes for the different species that we've got, and different shapes. But most of them will also have the hair and the little collection of bones in. They're all the things that an owl doesn't want to bother digesting. And that goes for the same with other species. So you'll get some of our birds of prey, the corvids, so crows will do it, and jackdaws, as well as some of our gulls as well, herring gulls, will, depending on what they've eaten, the stuff that just isn't worth trying to digest, they will bring up as a pellet. So you can see this one's got a load of seeds in, and here's some really coarse grass, neither of which is going to give them very much nutrition, which is why they've got rid of it. You might find some bones, this poor badger skull, which, well, if you've got a skull, then that should be quite easy to tell what it's from. But there's lots of books and information about how you can tell bones between species. So a quick thing with references. This is a book that I really like, Hamlin's Guide, Animals, Tracks, Trails and Signs. And with health and safety, please be sensible. So I've said things tonight, like you can tell the difference between holes if you stick your arm down them. Please be careful doing that if you do. And if you've been out touching anything or rubbing droppings between your fingers to see if they crumble, please wash your hands as soon as possible, and certainly before you eat anything. There is avian flu about at the moment, so please either to wash your hands, but ideally just don't touch feathers or any bird carcasses that you find. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Helen. Sorry, I've taken up a lot of time, and I've got one last slide that my colleague sent me yesterday, found at the base of a post. And what could it be? So if anyone's got any thoughts, do let us know. We think we know what it is, but I thought I'd test you immediately. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jess. Thank you. That was brilliant. There's so much to try and remember, but I think I'll definitely keep a lookout for otter spraints next time I'm out near some water, because that seems like quite an obvious one if you're looking out for it. And also I'm going to remember to try and look for lots of multiple signs and clues, because you can't just sort of take it in isolation, can you? You can get other evidence, like, you know, we won't probably see a red squirrel around here, so that we shouldn't think that we found those. And I'll be looking at animal droppings with a renewed appreciation as well. So if anyone's, we have got a few questions which I'll go through now. If you've got any other questions, pop them in the chat. We'll try and cover them if we've got time. And also, if you've got any feedback for us, pop that in the chat as well. It helps us to plan our future sessions. Only we'll see the chat, and not everyone watching will see it. So let's just go to the chat. So I've got a question about, do you not get waterfalls where minks are because the minks predate the voles?
That is certainly one element of why we don't have waterfalls anymore. Mink are brilliant predators, and they are also pretty savvy. So if they find back in the day where we had enough waterfalls for them to find, where they'd find a few burrows of waterfalls, they would just go back and back and back until they've eaten all of them, pretty much. I mean, waterfalls are basically food for everything, but mink really took advantage of that.
Oh, okay. And a question from Anne about waterfalls again, but she thought that they had 4 toes at the front and 5 on the rear. Is that right? Or I think it may have said something slightly different on your slide. But...
Oh, I think I showed a picture of 5 toes. Sorry, I've been looking at so many prints all day.
Yeah. Is that the same for all rodents, she's wondering?
So
are they all the same or not?
No, they're not all the same. So they do vary slightly. So the ones that we saw had this sort of, I feel like I'm doing an alien salute here. But so 3 pointing forwards and 2 out to the side, which is really typical of small mammals. But yeah, there are lots of species that have slightly different front and rear.
Okay, so it sounds like there's quite a variety. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. So sometimes there's only 2 that point up, and depending on if it's frontal, rear.
Thank you. Someone else, Carol, was asking what causes deer droppings to be a different shape.
You know, I haven't looked into that. But it's I don't know what goes on inside a deer's stomach that does that.
You mean you don't know everything?
I'm afraid I don't know everything. But I'm there's lots of this. Every time I do a talk, I realise that there's always something else in there that I don't know, that I need to go and look up. And that is one of the things.
And then I think relating to bats, I think when you were talking about bats, this came in from Heather. I've seen dropping marks down my wall from a vent/roof. Do you know what they could be? That's the first bit of the question. Do you want to answer that? And then there's another bit.
So is it a vent that would be big enough for a bat to get into? And pipistrelles are kind of only the size of like your thumb, so they don't need to be very big holes for a bat to get in and out of. It could be. So they do quite regularly do droppings as they enter or come out of a roost, and they can get caught on a wall, or likewise if they leave urine as well.
Pipistrelles quite like roosting in the summer under roof tiles and things.
Yeah, they do.
Well. And the other part of her question was, oh, I think you covered it later because it was about hedgehog prints and droppings, and we talked about those, didn't we?
I know. I can't believe I forgot to put one in. I'm sorry. I have a hedgehog dropping that I take everywhere, but of course on Zoom.
Someone might have to Google that one.
They're black. They're twisty again.
Yeah.
They can be quite long. And they're usually black and shiny because hedgehogs eat a lot of invertebrates.
Yeah.
So that's why they get the shine, and you find them all over your lawn if you've got hedgehogs.
We get those definitely on our patio, definitely hedgehogs. Yeah. And someone else, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but Carol wonders what might have excreted droppings with bright blue wing cases that she sometimes sees in forests and woodlands.
Could be badger. So badgers eat a lot of invertebrates. So that's one idea. If it's in woodlands, I'd probably go for badger, particularly if it's in a latrine. That's really obvious, and that's where they tend to do droppings, but they might do droppings elsewhere as well. And those bright blue cases sound like I think it's a type of door beetle that you get for a couple of months in the summer with the really sort of almost violet sheen to them. But that they get hoovered up by a badger if it was found on the way.
Another question here. Apart from cats and foxes, which other animals direct register? And do you want to explain what that is? I think it's when the rear foot goes into the front.
Oh, right.
Is that right?
Yes. So we've had otters. I don't think I can give you a list off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
So otters, because you showed us that picture, didn't you? And you kind of think that it's a different paw print, but they've stood on their front paw print with their rear Or
Yeah, there are a few, and it can obviously change with the different gaits and the speed that they're going as well. So you know, otters walking will have one thing, but they can also do their sort of their run as well, which, you know, the different speed of animals will leave slightly different prints as well.
Yeah, and then I think we've just got another minute. Are there just two terms for droppings and scats? Are they the most widely used terms, or there are other? Well, there's other ones I can think of that I can't say on the Zoom.
Yeah, probably not ones that we
in scientific terms,
scientific, yeah. So droppings
and
scat. So they are for lots of species interchangeable, particularly for like larger mammals. And then droppings, particularly for smaller mammals.
And finally, I know you like people sending recordings to DBRC, to the Biodiversity Records Centre. What kinds of things are you sort of interested in someone saying, would you want to know about tracks and droppings, or would particular things?
Yeah. So if there's something that you are pretty sure that you've identified, and the good thing with tracks is they don't move. So once you've found them, they're nice and still, so you can take a photo, like pop a coin or a pen in it as well. So on the DBRC website, there is a page where you can submit a sighting, and you can also attach a photo with that as well. So if you find something, do send it in to us.
And it's
dbrc.org.uk, I think.
Okay, but obviously if you search for it, you'll come across it. Someone's
DBRC
just asked, finally, will we be sent a recording? Yes, we're going to send out a follow-up email, include that for people that joined late or dropped out for any of it. And also it's also nice, I see that a couple of children were watching with their mum, and they're going to be out on their walks looking for signs. So
brilliant.
I think that's probably enough and dead on time. So it just remains to say thank you all very much for coming along tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it. We've got a lot of more talks lined up over the coming months, so you can see details of those on the Devon Wildlife Trust or the Green Minds Plymouth website. And hopefully we'll see you at some of those. But thanks so much, Jess, for sharing all your amazing knowledge with us tonight.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Okay,
and see you again.
Bye, everybody.